about my relationship to alcohol. Not because I think I have a problem with alcohol. It's just that I had less than 2 glasses of wine last night. 2 glasses. And not big glasses either. And I haven't had a drink all week. And just those 2 glasses has resulted in kind of a headache and a slow kind of like, ugh. And it just sucks because I really like the experience of being with friends or just having a glass of wine. And, it just feels like that's not really what I'm going to be able to do very much. I mean, I'm particularly kind of discouraged about it because I'm heading on vacation, and I like to sip on a few drinks at the end of the day on vacation, and I don't want to be dragging. So, it's just something I got to work on, and I feel sad about it. All right. So today is the last day of the week, Friday, and it's the last day for me for another week because, like I said, I'm going on vacation next week. No training in the morning, at least coming from me. So yeah, I'm out of here. So I'm thinking like, all right, forget you guys, I'm gone. Just kidding. But yeah, so today's vulnerability. So the track of the week kind of goes like this. We start out with very warrior type considerations: violence, guns, weapons, violence and weapons. Tuesday is politics and power. And I kind of look at this stuff, this realm, the beginning of the week, as the arts of war. These are what warriors have to really pay close consideration to. Wednesday is the equalizer. Wednesday is what we can all get involved in together. Our civil society and our warrior society. Gratitude. Okay, we can come together around that. Wednesday. Thursday is God and love, or spirituality and love. And then today is vulnerability. Now, these things I look at as the arts of peace, right? So in the arts of war, you're dealing with, kind of like this, right? In the arts of peace, you're kind of dealing with this, open arms, open heart. So one's here, the other is here, right? And today's topic is, why does the story feel so real? So I'm going to tie that into vulnerability. And so first, I want to do a similar style that I did yesterday, which is let's just get into the training as the conversation goes, because remember, we're doing this to be the best versions of ourselves more often than not. And part of that, involves, recognizing something showing up, learning how to settle it down, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But that's all part and parcel with being the best version of ourselves. So you can't interact well in the world spun up. You just can't do it. So you've got to find a way to armor down, get yourself back to the best version of yourself, and then move forward. So that's what we're always trying to do. So I just want to kind of bring it in. So, in the context of why does this story feel so real, let's look at it in opposite of the first bell. So in the first bell, it's all about connecting to the present moment: sight, sound, taste, touch, smell. But what's the opposite of that? The opposite of the moment is connecting to the mind, recognizing what's behind you, what's been before, and what's coming. So as you are interacting with those things, you're working with what society is offering you. Your mind is connected to the larger picture because of education, because of experience, and because of the stories that people have told you. So what you're coming into with life is a whole bunch of past. And so you're also, from that past, interacting with expectations. So expectations about behavior, expectations about what you're going to get out of your life. And those expectations are often varied, and they're kind of different based on who is expecting what, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so part of our job is to figure out a way to think about that. How do we think about what came in our past and what's coming? How do we think about that? Well, we build a narrative. And the narrative is whatever makes the most sense to us that gives us some kind of understanding of why what happened to us happened and what is coming or what's going to happen to us. So the opposite of the first bell is the story. First bell is all about getting to the present moment. Well, the opposite of the present moment is what's going on. And from the warrior perspective, the expectation, the past and the future are centered around kind of the heroes that we emulate and the warriors that we imagine we are like or lived up to, and then what comes after that. And so all the interactions that we have with other warriors, all the talking and engagements and the movies and the t-shirts and all that kind of stuff fosters that story, okay? And that's the narrative, right? So then we get to second bell. So as we have this narrative, right? I mean, just think about basic training, all the plaques on the walls. And I mean, hell, think about the names of military bases. I mean, except for a lot of the old Confederate military bases, which don't make a lot of sense because half of them are all shitty generals. But most military bases, the stories of heroism, that's who they're named after, heroes, right? People who did incredible stuff. And so part of the story about why these guys and gals, mostly guys, but now especially more and more women, why these guys and gals did such heroic things was they were able to just push through unimaginable challenge. Never leave a man behind, never give up the ship, just these stories of heroism, okay? And so what the stories tell us and what they kind of give us room to aspire to is part of what makes the military training so kind of special. And fundamental to military training is the ability to kind of push through the body. So whatever shows up in the body is disregarded, is pressed down, is just nope, not messing with it, in favor of the mission. And so you are building a relationship to your body that has a in front of it. You just can't get past this. And so what you're doing, while effective in the realm of kind of the warrior life that you have to lead, especially in a combat environment, while that's incredibly effective, it literally denies your biology. Denies it. You cannot separate from your body. It's impossible because your body is always trying to prepare for, recover from, learn how to blend with. It's always trying to do those things constantly. And so while you're trying to suppress, or while you are suppressing what's showing up from the body in favor of the mission, the body's still sending signals. It's just sending them differently based on how you're responding to it. So it's getting better at what you're asking it to do, but at the same time, it has to send the signal somewhere. It has to do this stuff. And so for all of us out there with trauma, we're experiencing what happens when the suppression can no longer hold. We are experiencing what happens when the suppression no longer holds. Now, you combine that with a story about what it means to be a warrior and what's expected of a warrior, the past and the future, then what you've got to create just by default is some kind of narrative to manage that conflict. And so the narrative that you create has got to be effective because you got to survive. And so you can create a narrative that allows for whatever story is going on inside of you to be the story that gives you justification for how to keep going and justification for what's going on with you. Now, the problem that we face around second bell is that we're just not as a society, there's not a lot of past and there's not a lot of language into the future about doing this in a successful way. Most of the past, especially around warriorship and resiliency, has to do with just being tougher. And the problem with that is that it doesn't account for the language that the body is talking to you in, and it doesn't account for the fact that most people are unaware that the story exists to begin with. So part of the reason we're so vulnerable to this reality is we don't know how to be in the present moment. Our minds are in the past and the future. We have to create a story to kind of narrate the experiences that we're having. Our interactions with our body are kind of like for lack of a better word, dumb. We're interacting with a super sophisticated thing, intelligent thing in a kind of a dumb way. That's how powerful our consciousness is. And what we're experiencing with regards to trauma, et cetera, is how do you interact with something really, really sophisticated if the only tools that you have are kind of like dumb, right? It's like you're trying to play a PlayStation 4 or 5 game on a PlayStation 1. It just won't work. And so you're trying to get something done in a way that's just not up to snuff. So we just do what we can, and then we've got to consider the fact that our body learns, right? So we're learning, our body's learning what has to be done to keep moving forward, but our awareness is just on the story. It's just on the story of what's going on. And so all that is accounting for are vulnerabilities. Right? The warrior goes into the most vulnerable places. That's just what we do. We go into the places that no one's gone before. We go into the places that offer the most risk. We go into those places, and our job is to excel in those places. And so what we have our legacy of this, which is changing now, but our legacy of this is one of suck it up and drive on, put the mission first. That's the way we've handled our vulnerabilities best. And because we've handled them that way, we've facilitated in the warriors themselves this ability to create a grand narrative that supersedes everything else, and we can use it. It works. The problem is that it doesn't work for very long. So as we go into third bell, which is interacting with the breath, the basic idea behind interacting with the breath is that you're acknowledging the fact that your central nervous system is intelligent and that you can interact with it in an intelligent way, and that the breath is one of the, if not the most important thing to learn how to interact with, because it's directly connected to this intelligent central nervous system. And just like your story can be kind of ingrained and built into your brain, you can also build and ingrain resiliency into your brain. But the opposite of that, the opposite of having a kind of a direct relationship to your internal world, is outsourcing it. So what we've done, and this is again what makes us so vulnerable, is we have lots of history and we have lots of past of how we've dealt with this reality, how we've dealt with these vulnerabilities, because 20% of all warriors have significant debilitating PTSD after battle. That's across the board. That's going back to like ancient Greece. It's just part of the human condition. It's about 20%. So that's a huge number, massive number. So that's 20% debilitating. I'd say 100% of all warriors experience massive changes into the way their central nervous system responds to threat. And that's just a byproduct of the fact that the damn thing is smart. It is smart. and it's connected to all your senses, and it's constantly monitoring what's going on. Now, if that's the case, and we've got a narrative that doesn't include a conscious interaction, but an outsourcing, what happens? Well, what happens is Iraq and Afghanistan. We outsource how our bodies are taken care of, and we wait for someone else to tell us based on their studies and tests and whatever, blah, 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 what to do. Fix it. So the basic idea that we're working with, remember, this is back to first bell. It's really important to understand this. What we're dealing with from the past, what people are leaving us, is legacy. The legacy that we've been left is a legacy of toughness. It's not a legacy of resilience. It's a legacy of toughness. The difference between toughness and resiliency is as follows. Toughness is, I'll just suck it up, tell me what to do. Resiliency is, I know how to work with what shows up. Toughness is fix it, tell me what to do. Resiliency is, I'm engaged in the process. I know what to do, what shows up, because I've tried this, that, and the other thing. Tried this, that, and the other thing. Well, our legacy is toughness, which we don't want to lose. We just want to add resiliency. And the reason why we want to add resiliency is because everyone's vulnerabilities kind of show up in a kind of a unique kind of way. And part of the reason why they show up in a unique kind of way is because of the stories that each of us have and the coping mechanisms that each of us have to navigate the fact that our beings have a physical, our sufferings, our vulnerability have a physical manifestation that show up in any given moment. And if you're always pushing it down and your story is always kind of worried about the past, analyzing the past, and planning for the future, and pushing stuff down, there's no chance for resiliency. And so when we get into third bell, we're outsourcing. We've outsourced our well-being. And so because it's outsourced and not self kind of owned and kind of engaged with as in a sense of, I can do this, or I can play a public role. Don't get me wrong. We need professionals to help guide us, give us parameters, give us structures, give us an assist, because no one can do this alone. But we still need to be working on a ground of responsibility, of self-responsibility. That's the only way you make the greatest amount of right decisions moving forward is to acknowledge that you yourself have a role to play. And that's third bell. Third bell is the role of interacting with your central nervous system systemically, with going from revved up to armored down, which is the parasympathetic side of the nervous system. You've got to be practicing that, doing that. And the reason why you can do that is because you're vulnerable. You are vulnerable to our history, our warrior history, and you're vulnerable to that history's expectation about wars in the future. Now, that's changing. Don't get me wrong. It's changing. But remember, the topic is, why does this story feel so real? That's why. That's why. The future it's coming. The time is coming where we are going to build resiliency into the warrior itself, other than toughness. The difference between toughness and resiliency, remember, toughness is, I'll suck it up, you tell me what to do. Resiliency is, I've got all the skills to do what you're asking me to do, and more. That's resiliency. So that's kind of getting into third bell. And so the last piece, fourth bell, which is kind of going into the day, fourth bell. So imagine going into this is why the story, ultimately why the story feels so real, is imagine going into the day, every moment, with the opposite of present tense awareness, the opposite of being connected, engaged with the body, and the opposite of resiliency, the opposite of having a sense of responsibility for what's going on inside of you. So what does that make you? That makes you completely engaged with the mind. Completely engaged with the mind. Okay, so you're not present. There's nothing going on in the moment that you're paying attention to. Whatever's happening in the moment is just getting to the next thing or an expression of the past. You're not engaged in the moment. So your mind, one, is number one. Number two, whatever your body's giving you, you're not interacting with it. Your body is just a means to the end of the story that you tell yourself. Your body's just a means to the end of the story. So you're totally disconnected from the body, except for like major events, like major things, like major amounts of pain or major amounts of pleasure, or whatever. There's not a subtle engagement that's improving in any way. It's just your body's just meat. That's the opposite. That's part of the second reason why a story feels so real. Third reason is the sense of responsibility is out. It's not in. My doctor's responsibility is the one. And so that placement of the agency outward is also a part, because there's a sense of powerlessness. And for many, the sense of powerlessness is very real. I hope I'm not giving anyone the impression that what they're doing is their fault, or that they shouldn't be getting help or anything like that. That's not what I'm trying to say. What I'm trying to say is why the story feels so real. And these are the reasons why the story feels so real. And so think about the story in the context of nothing to counter it. Nothing to counter it. And when you start to counter it, this is another piece. So this goes into fourth bell. When you start to counter the story, you're trying to counter the impact of years and years, decades, generations of the story. And we all have the story, because that's part of what our society is dealing with right now, is the story of racism and the story of white supremacy. And that story is BS. It's just not true. It's all a myth. It's built off of a lie. But it's been the story, so it's just still the story. So we're fighting back against it now, but the story has deep roots. And so when you challenge that, it's hard. It is hard, because all the opposite of bell 1, the opposite of bell 2, the opposite of bell 3 is all taking place all the time. And it's only in the beginning it's only when you really start to develop the counter that you really start to notice your agency in there. So that's really why I make the story feel so real. And then the final piece, the fourth bell. So the fourth bell is going into the day, and the fourth bell going into the day posits that life has a relationship to you, and that life is participating with you. And so part of the way we have, addressed the vulnerability of life's participation with us is in the context of religion. And religion has offered us a story as to why things are the way they are. But if that narrative is combined with the opposite of presence, the opposite of being connected to the body, and the opposite of feeling a sense that there is a sense of agency going about what's going on inside of you, then religion feeds the story in an even bigger fashion. And the whole narrative of us kind of participating in our lives is now contending with that religious narrative. Now, what I have attempted to articulate is my experience with divinity, with God, which is not based on religion. There are aspects in religion that I think point to the reality of a human's relationship to divinity. But religion itself is kind of like the warrior identity is largely built off of a past narrative, one that includes just put your trust in God, just or deny the body, the body's sinful. Just put your trust in God. You know, that narrative, that story is a big one. It's a really big one. You know, why does the story feel so real? I mean, that's huge. That's massive. So when you get to the fourth bell, and this is what I think is worth kind of continuing to explore, is that what is inside of you, what you're interacting with inside yourself and its intelligence is a fractal, a tiny version of what interacting with the world is. So by interacting with the internal world, you're interacting with kind of the life inside of you, and life, I think, is synonymous with divinity. It's divinity is life itself, and the cumulative expression of life is God. And so to interact with yourself with a sense of agency and with a sense of participation and ability to influence is precisely what I think interacting with life offers too, is that there's this way to, when you engage with life in a conscious kind of meaningful way, life responds in turn. And that story has been articulated as, you know, maybe if you find favor with God or you do the right things. But that just feeds the story of a past and future analysis. So again, in the realm of why the story feels so real, that's again kind of our relationship to life is again reinforcing that. So instead, it's not so much God will find favor on you, it's that God has created a space for what's happening inside of you to be reflected back as life itself. And so the story of past and the future, kind of like, this is what is expected with me. I'm not interacting with the body, and I'm, you know, it's not up to me. It's like I have no choice in the matter. That's, you know, 3. That story in the relationship to life definitely feeds the story. I mean, that makes the story just that much more unescapable. Right? There's nothing else to see. And so what happens when we armor down is we start to build that counter experience. It's not a story anymore. The story isn't the only thing. When you armor down, the story goes from looking like this to starting to, like, oh, you can start to see through it. Then it starts to become transparent, and then it starts to open up. Doesn't disappear, it just starts to open up. Because I guess that's the final thing I'll say before we sign off and go on vacation, is that to see yourself as the story, again, is to look at things from a very, very small perspective. And we are fundamentally vulnerable, as, I mean, that's part of what gives life its flavor, our vulnerability. And so interacting with vulnerability with just the story is, again, like playing, you know, cards with a third of the deck. You just can't do it. And so that's, I mean, and if you're giving if the third of the deck is the only thing you're using, then you've got to give the third of the deck the most value, because you're not perceiving the other 2/3. It's just, there is no other deck. It's just that. So if you're not aware of the present moment, if you're totally consumed by your thoughts, if you're not interacting with your body, if you're not interacting with your central nervous system, then you can't even perceive the other aspects of the human experience. It just doesn't exist. That's the way it has almost always been. So it's not anyone's fault that the story is so real. It's not. It's just. It's okay, right? It's not a big deal. It's not. It's not a mark on you as a failure. It's our culture, our society, and we are improving, but it takes time and it's hard to do. And when there's 99% of the population is still inside their story and still kind of with the old ways of experiencing the human experience, it's just what you're gonna get. I mean, it's it's nobody's fault. It's not any. It's not a. It's not a. Oh God, there's no blame. It just is. And so once you recognize that this part of the reason the story is so real is because the other 2/3 of your human experience are underdeveloped, then all of a sudden it's like, oh, so I just got to develop these other 2/3. And that's why we're here. That's why we're doing this. That's why we armor down in the morning. And that's why that's what I love about my life and my job is to help through my experience of the other 2/3 of my life. I get to share that with you guys. And it's just opening up in ways that are just unimaginable. And I'm so grateful. And it's so awesome. And so I encourage you over this week off to don't stop the training, and please feel free to keep interacting on social media. Got my cell phone. I can be connected anywhere. But for the most part, I'm done teaching for a little bit. We'll take a week off. I really, really, really want to say thank you. Gosh, I mean, I started this on January 2nd or whatever, and now it's the end of June. 6 months. We're in an entirely different world. An entirely different world. And we've been at it together, We've been at it together, moving through this together. And a lot of you, Stephanie, Megan, Candace, Brent, the people that have shown up, going back to the beginning. Thank you. It's seeing you all in the morning. It's a boost. So thank you. But yeah, gosh, 6 months, right? 6 months, every day, every weekday, 0600. So much has evolved. It's incredible. Thank you, Armor Down. Thank you. See you in a week.